The floor is yours. Am I connected? I seem to be connected. I do have my own mic. My name is Maciej Zakrocki. I have been dealing with European affairs for 25, maybe even 30 years now. Hopefully, this type of experience is something that will be helpful today in our panel. Without further ado, may I ask our guest to join me here.
Rasa Juknevičienė, posłanka do Parlamentu Europejskiego z Litwy. Dzień dobry.
Member of the European Parliament from Lithuania. Welcome.
Biskup Ladislav Német, Vice President of the
Bishop
Council of
Ladislav
the
Német.
European Bishops' Conferences i wszystkim już dobrze znany pan ambasador Jan Tombiński,
Ambassador
high-level advisor to the
Jan
government of
Tombiński.
the Republic of Moldova. Because majority of us speaks Polish, so there is decision that we will be speaking Polish, if you don't mind. Not you, so, but I'm just requiring to use this equipment, yeah, for translation. O rozszerzeniu Unii Europejskiej o wiele
EU enlargement. We've been talking about including many more countries for years now. In the European Parliament, there is a lot of enthusiasm for the enlargement process. All the more so because under the EU treaties, any European country that fits the necessary criteria and sets our values has a right to join the European Union. And yet, we know that many countries, especially those in the Western Balkans, well, Turkey is a separate case, have been trying, knocking on the door for years now, and still it is not something to be taken for granted, their membership, that is. So the first question is to a politician. At the last EU Parliament session, there was a debate on EU enlargement, by the way. So, Madam Juknevičienė, what do you think? Do we actually want enlargement? We know full well that it's all up to the so-called political will. Is there a political will in Europe to do that or not?
Is it connected? Okay. First of all, I would like to thank Jan Olbricht, my good friend and colleague in our group, EPP group, and in European Parliament for inviting me to this important event. And I will have to say that you have to be proud having such a person as representative in European Parliament, serving for so long time and will be serving, I hope, in the future as well. So thank you, Jan, for your cooperation, for your outstanding position always when we need your position in our group. Answering your very concrete question, also, first of all, I would like to thank organizers for the very correct title of the conference. It's very much related with your question and with our panel today, because not very often we see, when we speak about this war in Europe, usually on media elsewhere, we see the headlines or titles, "War in Ukraine." So it means that here everybody understands that this war is not only about Ukraine, it is about us, it is about the future of Europe, and the future of Europe I see only with great ambition to become, for the completion of European continent. At least when we speak about Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, other countries, even Belarus, this war is about the future of Europe. In European Parliament, yes, but it not always was as it is today. Majority of the main political groups, main political parties now are supporting enlargement, and it's like a breakthrough. But this breakthrough came to this majority of members of European Parliament only when this brutal war was launched. I remember very well, and Jan will say the same, just a week before 24th of February, when we discussed in our group, in the presidency, the request from President Zelensky to mention in the resolution candidate status for Ukraine. I think we were only 2 or 3 in our group presidency supporting this idea. Now it is no doubt, it is approved, it is mentioned in many resolutions in European Parliament, but it was not so easy. Behind this majority, we have a lot of blood of Ukrainians. And all these mistakes were done before in European Union, in NATO, I think also matters. And we have to evaluate those lessons learned. And yes, it's a geopolitical challenge, but it's no other way. If we will leave these gray zones on European continent, gray zones of insecurity, we will be challenged and challenged and challenged by countries like Russia, as it is today. And maybe later I will evaluate a little bit more about my understanding about the way how we have to proceed with such important issue. But also at the end of this, my first intervention during this panel, I have to remind you that while we are discussing here, just this morning, Russia launched 33 missiles. They were launched by bomb droppers and also from the Black Sea Fleet. And at the same time, it is a very, very dangerous, not dangerous, but some challenging moment in the Chinese Communist Party Congress. I am telling this because it is related very much with our future, with our challenges for our future, challenges for European Union. When former leader of China, who was escorted out of the hall by men in civilian clothes, and of course it is a message. What way China will follow in nearest future, and what kind of challenges we will have. So it means that European Union have to be united as never before, and not only European Union, but European continent, including those countries, they want to be together with us. It is utmost important for the moment we live and exactly the moment we speak now here.
Z tym, że właśnie wydaje się, że
It seems that the European Parliament, which is always more European, more pro-European than the Council, has visibly and clearly changed its stance and its rhetoric too. And it's very much politically involved in the process of enlargement. And yet, when you look at the EU governments, let me say that they are more cautious and significantly more so. Maybe the government leaders should or need to take into account the public opinion in the countries. It was quite telling, actually. After the war broke out, it was February the 24th, and President Zelensky declared that Ukraine would like at least a candidate status. A meeting took place of those leaders in Versailles, and it ended up in a disappointment because in the Versailles Declaration there was no provision. Yes, we believe that Ukraine should be granted EU member candidate status. Mr. Ambassador, why?
I do not quite know why, because I was not present there. But perhaps you know more. Well, I'm not able, of course, to reconstruct the arguments used there. But let me start by trying to answer perhaps the previous question that you addressed to Madame Juknevičienė. I think our opinion about the enlargement is somewhat distorted. They were always responses to different events, with the exception perhaps with the early 1970s and the UK joining the European Union. This is what the countries, all countries wanted that. But as for the next enlargements, they were under pressure of events, either the end of dictatorship in Greece, or Spain or Portugal, or our change in this part of Europe, 1989-90, actually Austria, Sweden and Finland in 95 joined in still before that. And this is roughly what happens until today. When I think now about the thoughts of the leaders, it looks like they are not paying enough attention to history. They are not able to draw conclusions from what happened before, and they are somehow not able to plan such political actions that would respond to what people want, not only in the EU, but also outside the EU. So we are usually acting when we are forced to act by the different events. After the events in the Balkans, for instance, I'm sorry to say that we lost about 20 years in the Balkans. Until 1998, I was Polish ambassador in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I see how much time was wasted there in West Balkans. The same happens now in Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, with the European response to their aspirations. When in 2011 we were finalizing our discussions within the European Union on the association agreement with Ukraine, most of the, let's call them still old member states of the EU, they did not want to agree to have a sentence there that would say that Ukraine is a European country. Why did they object? Because then the conclusion was that this will be a certain foundation for presenting on the basis of Article 49 article that makes it possible for countries to join the EU. There were different formulations suggested that Ukraine is a country of European calling, or it's a country in Europe. Many diplomats wanted to avoid this clear statement, which would very clearly, directly show this perspective to Ukraine. All those different events later were needed. The Maidan events, 2013, 2014, then the war, the first part of the war we are seeing today in 2014, and the war of 2022. Only now, I think, there is better understanding in Europe about what the will of the people is like. Those people, they themselves, they protect the European values with their life often, and the EU has to respond, because if we are not able to respond here to the will of the people in Ukraine, we are losing this value, big value as a community. Because what are we defending? Are we being just pragmatic? Are we trying to defend what we have? But if we focus on defense only, we are going to lose. Those on defensive are sooner or later losing out. We have to promote European values. You're asking me about the Versailles discussions. I don't know the details, but I'm very happy that after Versailles we had a radical change, and today nobody questions the fact that whether you take Ukraine or Moldova or Georgia, that those countries that want to, also the Balkan states, that they should join the community. What it's going to look like at the moment they join in, it's another question. Of course, this question is something we are going to go back to somewhat later, but can I please address the next question to our third guest, who knows Serbia very well. This is the only, perhaps, country of the potential future member states of the EU. Somehow it is not, how shall I put it, in a social way, is not showing determination that Ambassador Tombiński mentioned in the context of the events in Ukraine already from years ago. The Ukrainians in Maidan, many of them were killed with the flag of the European Union. Serbia, is it a special case or maybe just the opposite? Maybe we should actually do more for Western Balkan states to join the EU so that the Russian influences in this region do not prevail. I think we have to take into account both. Obviously, Serbia is not Ukraine, it's a much smaller country, but it's a country that emotionally is very much attached to Moscow. Not Moscow, of course, as a city, but Russia as a whole. Russia as a state, Russia as a country linked to the Orthodox Church, very much linked issues. Additionally, we've got problems from 1990s, as Ambassador Tombiński said, during the war in the Balkans, ex-Yugoslavia. The European Union or community at that time did not show much readiness to solve the problem. Different politicians in different countries had different interests in the region. Only the United States was able actually to help us resolve the situation. And the peace, well, as you know, much remains to be done. Also, as Bosnia-Herzegovina was mentioned, it's a country basically that exists only on the map, as some say. The military there, and Schmidt, the head of the country, and of course there are different influences there. The Muslim countries, Arab countries, Moscow, Serbia, other countries are using the political situation for their own good. Serbia, for instance, still is trying to realize the plans of Great Serbia, also in part of Bosnia. But in Serbia, there is now some fatigue that I'm observing as for negotiations with the European Union. It seems that the European Union is not very serious, perhaps, about progress, stressing the role of Kosovo, for instance. If Brussels has nothing to say, they just say Kosovo, and the Serbs just block further movement. I don't know why Kosovo is so important for Brussels. If Cyprus is divided, has been divided for about 60 years. One part of Cyprus is part of European Union, the other part is not, and will certainly not become part of the EU in the coming years. Why cannot the same happen in the case of Serbia? Why is it so important? And as long as the European Union is dragging its feet, then China, I think China is a much bigger player actually in the Balkans than the Russians. The Chinese are very much interested in this region. Russia comes second, very emotional. But the Chinese enter with funds, signing different agreements of friendship. And this really attracts many people. And one more comment, concluding now. An average Serb, as for emotions, they might look actually at Russia as a friendly state, but as for money, the financial side, looking at their wallet, they certainly would choose to go to Western Europe. I'm not sure whether you saw 5-6 years ago in Germany some advertisements, commercials, come to Poland on holiday, your car is already there. You remember perhaps such big banners. But in Serbia, actually, the comment is come to Austria, Germany or Switzerland, your family is already there. People are moving, migrating from Serbia to Western Europe. We are losing up to 50,000 people every year. Big brain drain. It is quite typical what Bishop Német said. Brussels somehow is not able to decide what it wants. But it is my impression that the bigger problem is not Brussels as understood as institutions of the EU, but rather governments of different countries, remembering about their interests, trying to maintain their influences in different countries. This community thinking, I think, is more seen in the European Parliament. Yes, I agree, or even in the European Commission, while in the Council, in the different capitals, I think it's very, very different. This is where there is perhaps no will and still hesitations. Let me go back to the first question perhaps I posed. The fact that the Council on the 23rd of June has given to Ukraine and Moldova the status of a candidate country. It was not the result of such huge pressure that could not be withstood anymore, that action had to be taken, but still, in the case of enlargement discussions in the Western Balkans, not much progress can be actually seen. A question to Madame Juknevičienė again from the European Parliament. Is it the task for EU institutions to convince different governments that for the future of the community you have to move away from some national interests and focus on the community interests?
No one decision is easy in European Union because it's very special community with different interests, with regional interests, states' interests. But what we need today, I found quotation from 19th century, James Freeman Clarke, who was theologian, politician in the United States, and it's very much valid what we need today. I will quote him: "A politician thinks of the next election. A statesman thinks of the next generation." So what we need now, we need people, maybe today somebody will correct me, statesman or statewoman, but it's about the next generations. Are we able to look a little bit beyond the next election? But also, of course, it's important to keep our democracy going with the pro-European politicians in the governments. What we have today, I am proud on leadership of Ursula von der Leyen in this case, especially. So, as I understand, she has very deep understanding of her responsibility as European President of European Commission. And what we see also, what surprised me, is Chancellor of Germany, Scholz, who mentioned several times EU enlargement and also Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova in his speeches, being it in Prague or in the Congress of European Socialists recently in Berlin, and his messages were very clear. I would not be able to imagine this a year ago, be it German Christian Democrats or socialists even more. Today we have these speeches. I think it's still declarations, but they are very important because we know what does it mean that in the very beginning it was the word. So the word is very important from politicians. They matters. And yes, in Western Balkans, we see even situation with some kind of stagnation. But this is from both sides. From one side, this region is very special one with the tensions related with hatred sometimes among nations, among people have the same language, the same, the same history, but different religions, like in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also we have Serbia with this some kind of smaller, but also like Russian imperialistic approach in parts of the society, but also without clear message from the European Union, without any progress from European Union side to help those countries to become closer and closer to European Union. Without hope, fatigue comes. People became disappointed of what the European Union is doing not enough, you know, to help them. Then China comes, then Turkey comes, then Russia, of course. And is it our interest? Of course not. Of course, our interest is to avoid what we had already in Balkans, Western Balkans especially, several times in our history. So that's why we need statesmen thinking about next generations, and the same with especially Ukraine. Ukraine is like a fundamental key country for the region we live. With the Ukraine's success in this war, and with Ukraine's success to become member of EU and NATO, I have to underline, despite that maybe today many will say that it's impossible, but it is important. You know, a Polish experience, I know Lithuanian experience, that those both processes are complementary, very much complementary. So this is also, I would like to add what is most important to understand, that for the containment of Russia as it is now, it is very important this battle, to win this battle today, and to have as a success story in Ukraine. Maybe this success story in the future can help Russia to become different. Maybe it will be part of, at least we have to try to have Russia different next to us. I know that very many in this audience will say that Russia will never be different. Russian history shows that Russia always was imperialistic, but is it really, but I would like to say that this approach is very useful for people like Putin. Because if Russia will never be different, so why not to be back to business as usual as it was before, be it Putin or be it other person on the top? It means that we have to be back to business as usual in the future. So for us, our interest is, and myself, maybe I am, somebody will say, too naive and too idealistic politician, but I want to believe at least, and I want to have statement or people on the top of European Union to understand that the strategy on Russia is very important for the future of enlarged European Union as well. So we need the strategy, and the core momentum of the strategy is that in my lifetime I would like to see different Russia.
No, pięknie, to już można się rozmarzyć nawet, powiedziałbym. Ale jednak najpierw o kłopotach.
Right, okay, but first let's discuss problems that you've covered, issues in some of the candidate countries. Maybe out of that another question can be born and another justification of certain fears, certain anxiety of certain countries, especially in the so-called old Europe. So we have had this, well, basically maybe it's another issue that we will have to deal with. Maybe that's how people see it. Mr. Ambassador said that enlargements stemmed from certain dynamic processes that took place in certain countries. Let's look at Greece. Taking Greece in resulted from the fact that the EU wanted to draw it in after this dictatorship. And then the economic crisis broke out. We remember issues that Greece was having, and then some voices said, come on, Greeks are irresponsible. Why did we even take them into the Eurozone? In the Eurozone, you have to follow the rules, don't you? When it comes to our expansion, it had been a major political and geopolitical process. When I say ours, I mean the 10 that joined in 2004, I believe, and then Bulgaria and Romania followed suit. After a few years of enthusiasm from the very same part of Europe, problems started to appear. We know them. Some of them are linked to our own country, and some people started actually asking, okay, this is a problem. Why did we go for it? Why did we agree to that? Mr. Ambassador, so maybe enlargements is the kind of experience that makes you cautious. Some countries had not been democratic for long. The democracy was not strong, and this is why there are issues. Now they are presenting themselves to be strong democratic states, but we don't know what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years' time. In the EU, in all of those countries, you can find examples of various crises. Not a single crisis is a kind of crisis that other countries wouldn't have experienced before. Austria, some time ago, right-wing xenophobic government, and many other examples in the EU. You mentioned Greece. 10 years ago, the EU launched this financial assistance to Greece. And everybody said that euro would fall apart, that euro would collapse, that Europe would not be able to actually help Greece. It would be too difficult a burden. It's been, over 10 years, more countries joining the Eurozone and no collapse in sight. In the EU, we are used to complaining about ourselves. This is very much a European thing. I think that it has its roots in the Enlightenment, if you were to follow the more philosophical track here. However, when we say these things, let us keep in mind that EU has always been the kind of community that limited itself. In 2004, we had this enlargement, but the EU was actually afraid of foreign policy. It was afraid of its own internal strength. It had been afraid of it until 2004, and some people were attached to the strength of their own national states, and they were afraid to delegate these powers to the community. So the international role of France, Italy, Germany, Spain was weakened, but it reinforces the EU. At this point, there is this internal shift in what we appreciate. With each and every crisis, more and more competencies are pushed upwards to the EU level. With every crisis, the result is more Europe, not less Europe, in most countries, that is. In Poland, we could hear those voices. Some people say we want less Europe. But the question is, why is it that they want less Europe? Not because the community never responds to questions, but they believe that with less Europe it would be easier to manipulate certain national tools when we are liberated from certain obligations that we took on ourselves when we joined the EU. So, we're talking about the role of EU that is partly being treated as a rising global power. Trump's isolationism actually played a role there. We had to actually ask ourselves about the defense policy. Can the EU defend itself? Does it have this capacity? As a result, something that 5 years ago was unthinkable, now it's thinkable. Buying weapons for a non-EU member states for EU money, and it's happening with Ukraine. Basically, this is a very accelerated process of building this sense that the EU can be a major global actor. Now, the EU's role in the nearest neighborhood will play a role. Our nearest neighborhood, those who aspire to the EU, will decide whether we can respond to these aspirations. So the enlargement policy, by the way, it has been frozen for a few years under the previous commission. So this thawing is important because enlargement returned as important EU policy. Now, Russia war against Ukraine is a war against the EU. Russia as a power cannot comprehend that it lost its attractiveness as a pole that attracts other countries. At the same time, everybody's criticizing the EU. We here and they over there. Nobody knows what it works like. And yet it is a model that's so attractive that it attracts more and more countries that want to join the EU. Right. It is such an attractive model, but if it is largely to a certain peace and a lifestyle, this peace that can be enjoyed. Bishop, question to you. Bishop Német. Let's look at people from within the EU, our societies. There was this natural phase of feeling sympathy to Ukraine and people who were fleeing the war. Maybe people in the EU, one might start saying, okay, but one day it might get costly. Maybe we will be forced to share some of our riches. Look at what is happening in some countries. Let's look at how they react to sanctions that are imposed on Russia. Politicians should certainly pay attention to what societies feel. There was this demonstration in Prague, recent demonstration in Prague against further sanctions to be put on Russia. Some people were caught off guard when they saw how many people attended this protest. So, coming back to the enlargement will be, at our expense. Somebody always needs to foot the bill. Somebody needs to pay for any process. Nothing is for free. Neither a bigger nor a smaller room. And peace in Europe will not also come for free. Nothing is given for free. I'll just butt in. It was a Belgian politician who said, by the way, I liked it, it's better to have a colder temperature in your living room than Russians in your kitchen. Right. Well, I'd rather Russians stayed where they are, in their own country. This is the best country for them. So, the European community, not Europe, because Europe is bigger, so the European community at this point should take a step that would be wise on the one hand and naive on the other. But these steps should be powerful. Let me use this word. I remember Poland in the 80s. In 1977, please don't take offense, but At the time, you were 50 years behind Yugoslavia.
Byśmy już mieli kartki na cukier w 70.
I couldn't even get coupons, to buy food. I was a foreigner. I had to buy food in those special foreign currency stores. Poland back then was a truly poor country, let us put it bluntly, a great nation, a great culture, and yet a poor country. Today, you're a great nation, a great state, and economically is doing very better compared to what you had 50 years ago. I can tell you that because I do not come here very often, every 2 or 3 years, which is relatively rare, and I can see things change hugely. I do not mean only buildings or the roads. You do have highways now, which is yet another step that makes you better communicated. The European Union can achieve things provided it wants to. The Polish politicians and the nation had to accept it. Some things were accepted with pain and unwillingly, but it has been done. And another thing that Mr. Ambassador said, the EU works unfortunately only when they feel that things are falling apart, that there is a risk, a threat. And a question. I know why in Serbia we don't have such people. People who waged war in the 90s are back and they run my country. It is the EU's fault. In the year 2000, Milosevic was sent to The Hague, and the European community did not give enough support to Serbia. They were not given a fast track. At the time we wanted to join the European community, not a single party was opposed, but that was lost. In 2010, Vučić returned. In 1991, he was running around with a rifle in Sarajevo. And now everyone in the EU is okay to meet with him, and now he's a great president. Well, but that's another thing. So, the EU, why don't we have statesmen or stateswomen, as the lady said, people who can think big, that can leap forward over the little petty things that we find annoying, like, Kosovo. Or Bosnia and Herzegovina, no progress there, doesn't work. Why cannot we simply move forward? Why couldn't we have something like Marshall's Plan that was offered in the 40s? This investment continues to bring benefits. Austria, roads and railroads, it still works there, it still operates. Built back then. So we need to be optimistic. We need to have faith. We need to have faith that at times you can take a leap and jump over a number of potholes or even a major issue. You can leap over it. A person that is optimistic, a person that believes in the future, a person that is positive can always move forward. They can be enthusiastic because enthusiasms were born out of goodwill. Most people in Europe, I believe almost all of them, have this will to live well and not by themselves. They don't want to be egoistic. They want to live in a big community. Today in the morning we heard the following: it would be good that borders are not even noticed when we cross them, and yet we know that we're different, and yet we live together in a single Europe. My role is here to complain. I'm sorry, that's the hat that I wear. The year is 2007. This is when Bulgaria and Romania joined the EU. And they still haven't joined the Schengen zone, the Schengen area. Right, Mr. Ambassador, but it's been 11 years. Why not? Because some countries actually made it impossible. So when it comes to driving around in Europe and not noticing the borders, it's all right and very well when we think of a community rather than focusing on our particular interests. And that is why we have this debate in the Parliament, European Parliament. We're talking about Romania and Bulgaria, and this debate was quite surprising. Some people said, do you want smugglers and thieves in Europe? If you do, open the borders. There are such voices, you can hear them. Just to keep complaining. Soon you can hear people say, what about the EU budget in the context of enlargement? What about the money? Under the cohesion policy, basically this money is distributed according to how rich a region or a country is, and soon the poorest regions will be those in Ukraine or Moldova, and this is where money is going to go. And we here, we have all those needs. We need to build new roads, right? And we will get less money because of that enlargement. Some people will say that. At a certain point, by the way, I hope that the war is over as soon as possible, so we will stop paying attention to that tragedy. Peace will return. When it's returned, will people keep this enthusiasm for enlargement that we see here? I understand that Mr. Ambassador would like to say something because you've grabbed the mic. I have grabbed the mic because before I complained about the EU, but let us keep in mind the following. EU functions largely when you do your duties. Vision is one thing, but vision or a vision needs to be translated into particular actions. It is highly important to know what we want to accomplish, but we also need to know how we're going to accomplish that. A policy that works is not going to work without the right mechanics, the instruments, including financial instruments, that will make it happen. And the EU needs to be somewhat conservative. The EU needs to make sure that in this larger group it can still do the basic tasks. If it doesn't, the citizens of the EU member states will say, okay, it doesn't work for us anymore, it's going to fall apart. So cohesion depends on the EU's ability to follow through with its commitments, to follow up on what the bishop said. The EU is not a Marshall's Plan. It is not a one-off financial project to rebuild a given area. We have been discussing Marshall's Plan for Ukraine, but these are extraordinary circumstances. We are thinking about how to reconstruct a country that was ravaged by war. It's completely different. It's different from Serbia and other countries. So two curves need to meet here. The first one is a certain critical mass in a given country. There needs to be the will to take on a commitment and to follow through with it. On the other hand, people outside need to believe that they do something for our common good. Let us invite them. It's going to be costly, but in 5 or 10 years' time, we'll be all the safer for it. So it's better to prevent. We've already heard it at this conference. It's better to prevent now than later to finance armaments. Let's think about how much money was spent on Ukraine, how much money was spent to finance Ukraine during the war. It would have been so much cheaper if we acted before by building the right policy in this country, the right foundations for that. Madam Member of the Parliament, in your country, you have been benefiting from the EU budget significantly. Also, there is this extra budget, the reconstruction budget. Aren't you afraid that some people might say, come on, there is so much that we still have to do. It's too early for us to share with others. Aren't you afraid of that?
No, not in Lithuania. I am happy that even in the countries like Spain, other countries, they are a little bit more far away from Ukraine. I think it is in June, opinion polls show that majority of those societies, they are in favor of EU enlargement and Ukraine's membership in EU. So I was somehow surprised, because it's no doubt that people in my country, especially those they vote for me, for my party, they are totally 100% supportive. But of course, there are people, some of them, they are, you know, a little bit have different opinion, but majority, yes. But it is important. The opinion of the societies, we politicians depend very much on the opinion of the people, and it matters, of course. But on the other hand, I am back to what I quoted on statesmen looking for the next generations. Ambassador mentioned very important part of when we speak about enlargement. It is not only about the countries, they will do reforms or they are engaged to become part of EU, but also about us, about EU. We need, because, you know, an extraordinary situation requires extraordinary solutions. And we are in an extraordinary situation. So the old rules of accession are not given from God. It's given from politicians. They made these rules some years ago. Today we have different situation, and we have to, without rethinking of decision-making process inside EU, I don't see the success of the process of enlargement. It's a two-way process. Readiness of candidate countries and, of course, situation inside of EU, especially when we speak about decision-making process, so-called unanimity or a qualified majority vote, especially in foreign affairs. Look, how easy, maybe I will be too open to say, how easy for the country like Russian Federation to take at least one country when decisions are taken in European Council, and it is no decision at all. So it is really a very important challenge for countries like my country, for countries maybe like Poland and other countries. They just joined, not just, but are still, we have a title of newcomers of EU, that we are trying to keep our sovereignty. We think that it's for us, it's added value to have this unanimity in voting process. But I think it's opposite. It's vice versa. On the contrary, it is maybe also danger for our security and for our sovereignty not to have strong European Union. Remember our Commonwealth. When we lost our Commonwealth statehood at the end of 18th century, remember what happened with our Sejm at that time when it was veto right. We lost our statehood. For 100 and more years were occupied by Tsarist Russia. Maybe not all parts, we are in Krakow, a little bit different history, but nevertheless. So it's a lot to rethink, including budgets. You mentioned budget. Yes, it will cost. We have to say to our people openly, but the cost of this war in terms of money, but in terms of the people, we lost a lot of people in our continent, blood and so on and so on. So it's even more costly. not to take decisions. But on budgets, what I want to say, I think we have to start discussion. It already started, but many countries are against. European Union budget as such, 1% from each member state is so tiny, so small, so little we can deliver from EU budget, and very many countries are opposing on that. So many are speaking about autonomy on security. Many speak about, even not less little bit now, about European armed forces, but it's only empty speeches, because it's no budget at all even to think about. And when we speak about enlargement, of course, I know that very many politicians and people in other countries, richer countries, maybe were not so happy when we became members of EU. Not all were very happy, because they understood that their taxes will, taxpayers will pay for our reconstructions or reconstructed roads. And today, sometimes I am teasing our mayors in the cities in Lithuania when they are so proud they opening new squares, and this means that they are getting political points for that. But it's of course European Union membership, and no one mentioning that it's because of European enlargement. But that is another story. So. Yes, my final message on your question is that, of course, it will be a very difficult process. Of course, but it's no other choice. We just have to concentrate on it. And if we want really geopolitical player, European Union as geopolitical player with strong fundament, so we have to use enlargement as a tool to strengthen European Union. We have to somehow change the narrative, especially in so-called Western part of European Union, when everybody thinks that this enlargement is beneficiaries are only in the East, in Balkans or in Eastern Partnership countries. We have to change this narrative into our success. I mean, countries, they already are members of EU. And it's a challenge for us politicians to explain our people. If we will not do this, if we will not send the right messages, and we will play populism, speaking about the future of EU, of course, this success maybe will be not as we expect to have.
I chętnie jeszcze nawiążę do tego wątku, o którym pani powiedziała.
Can I refer still to what you've said before, that actually the whole decision-making process in the EU can be paralyzed with if we don't move towards majority decision-making. Chancellor Scholz some time ago spoke about union of up to 36 member states. Imagine possibly unanimous decisions for 36, not 27 countries. It's difficult already now for 27. How is it going to look like with 36? And again, there will be new countries with their own particular interests, perhaps entering the European Union with different allies. This is one thing. And then there are countries. The Polish government, current government, as you know, is against moving away from the unanimity principle in the foreign policy, also in the context of sanctions and so on. Secondly, Chancellor Scholz also spoke on this. There will be a need, especially for the new member states, so that they feel their dignity in the EU. One country, one commissioner. They are going to want to have their own commissioners. So we might end up with the European Commission made up of 36 commissioners. Chancellor Scholz says, well, I can imagine a situation in which 2 commissioners will be responsible for one portfolio. Well, in my opinion, well, I'm sorry to put it like this, but it's not very wise. How can you have two commissioners responsible for one thing? And the last, perhaps, element, the European Parliament. Again, the European Parliament is going to change its internal structure. After new enlargements, there will be new political groups, perhaps there might be stronger political groups, some are pro-European, but some also anti-European groups might grow stronger within the European Parliament, perhaps. So again, many questions, many doubts for what is going to happen in the future. As we hear that we need statesmen, stateswomen who will speak about the future and think in the perspective of the whole generation, they also need to think about that. The enlargement, maybe it might be destructive for the functioning of the European Union in the future. Can I put it back to you, Mr. Ambassador? Well, this is the beauty of politics. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen in a few years' time. We just have to look for solutions. I remember this principle of Robert Schuman. It was his recommendation for the first European Commission. He said, you are not here to negotiate, but you are here to find solutions. In my view, this is the clear task. We have to simply look for solutions, not to be against one another, as often happens in negotiations. I am not in favor, well, from my experience working for the EU, I am not in favor of a radical change to the unanimity principle, because this is the type of vote that actually keeps the community as a whole. Because if we imagine that there are many more areas, already now there is this reduction has already happened. As for the unanimity principle, it goes for the most important issues, the institutional issues, partly also foreign policy, and not in all areas, as you know. Also the enlargement. So, well, it is not the case, in my view, that the unanimity principle is a huge obstacle for us. We, especially journalists, often politicians, we stress the cases in which there is someone blocking a decision, like sanctions, for instance, if Hungary blocked some solutions in the context of sanctions for Russia. But we've seen in the past that a year or two later, some policies were actually moved on. We moved forward, perhaps without the participation of some countries that were against. These are just tasks for the politicians. I think sometimes we are too cautious, too careful. Sometimes we are trying to find some safeguards. But, well, life is hazardous, can be dangerous, and we simply have to be ready. Sometimes we're taken by surprise by life. Now, I'm sorry, but the argument that you have mentioned, Madam, is just enough for Russia, for their interest, as you said. We've got, imagine, Serbia part of the EU, and then Serbia might block something because of links to Russia. This might be in the interest of Russia. Isn't it a good argument? But then Serbia, another country that would be the blocking country, they will feel very quickly the consequences of such a decision in other areas. Because, again, imagine the community, of course, is aware of such problems and will find other solutions that the blocking country will feel consequences. It's not that easy, of course. In the EU, different processes take time, and sometimes consequences of decisions not closely linked to the root causes. This is a certain problem, yes, but when you speak about the efficiency of operations, after the 2004 enlargement, many people spoke that it would be more difficult to take decisions. And in real life, actually, decisions were taken. As for this process, the speed of taking decisions and the number of different decisions, it was actually faster after the big enlargement than before in a smaller group of countries. I'm sorry again to interrupt, but this is because the change of this, there was a change of the weight majority to a different system. It was still before the Lisbon Treaty entered into force, still before the change resulting from the Lisbon Treaty. There was no blocking after the big enlargement of 2004. So there is certain internal logics. It is possible to do things. Yes, there are ways. If there is political will, yes, it is doable. It is not the case that the number of member states has direct impact on the functioning. Some might say 6 were enough, 6 countries, and this would be enough. Well, just going back to the previous subject, for me it is always surprising, a bit painful as well, that the European community is now spending a lot on arming Ukraine, military assistance. Maybe it should have been done before, in the times of peace. There could be investments into the development of this country. And after the end of the war, as you know, even more funds will be needed for the reconstruction of Ukraine, almost like Marshall's Plan. More investments will be needed. So if we have a vision that we can invest before conflict in times of peace, let us not wait for military conflict and already help in times of peace. That's one subject. And another point, well, the European Union, in my view, is able to understand, well, in some cases maybe the understanding is not complete, but I think there is this internal strength in the EU when we are acting together. This is where the wisdom is, I think. Wisdom is the Greek problems, we know also Portugal had financial problems, and the European community was always able to find a solution. Also, as Mr. Ambassador said, also if there is a country blocking decisions, solutions are usually found. I think we don't have to wait for Serbia. We've got Hungary already now blocking decisions, as you have said, Mr. Moderator. Hungary is already, I think, doing it very well. It's not a Slavic country, as you know, but still, well, they are an obstacle to some decisions. I think that the European community and the power of rational approach, not emotional, but a rational approach to politics, I think in this way we can always find a solution. Maybe it will not be the original solution we envisaged, but still the principles of the European community, well, any community, they are based on dialogue, on discussions. If there is no dialogue between countries, then, well, of course it's difficult to find a solution. And dialogue is about opening up to others, to our partners, so that we can come to some conclusion. Not compromise at all cost, but some value. This final solution should be valuable, add some value. We speak of values. This is very important here.
What we are discussing in European Parliament, in AFET, in our group, among those people, we have huge interest on further enlargement. So it is about reforms, as we already a little bit talked inside EU itself. But it's not only decision-making on unanimity or qualified majority. It's like an example of one of the possible reforms. By the way, it's approved by European Parliament already, because it was discussion about the future of Europe. It's our common opinion of many groups in the Parliament, majority of the Parliament. But also, I repeat myself saying that this extraordinary situation requires extraordinary solutions. We have to rethink these old rules of accession, and for example, why not to have some stages for enlargement, starting with the single market. Because single market is utmost important for the countries. They are asking for membership. Not membership maybe immediately, as of course it will not happen, but what is utmost important, this window of opportunities, and not to lose the time, and timeline is also important. What I am afraid of the situation of today, that this how to say, political will which we hear from Ursula von der Leyen, Roberta Metsola, or Chancellor Scholz now, and other Eastern, so-called still Eastern member states, they are very much in favor, especially for Eastern Partnership countries to be included, those 3 countries from Eastern Partnership included into the process as soon as possible. These bureaucratic rules that we will be sinking into the process, long process, and it will not help to change the situation or to help, will not help Ukraine. If, for example, what we are pushing and trying to push Commission not to delay with invitation. So to provide invitation, I mean for negotiations. Would be very good if next year already it will be next step from European Union to start negotiations with the countries. We remember very well that the beginning of negotiations pushed a lot in our countries for reforms, pushed a lot, started this process itself helped a lot to reform ourselves. So especially on Moldova, when we see now situation, this window, unfortunately we have no representative from Moldova. We expected to have.
But we have.
But that is very, very, very important. Also, our responsibility. This small nation, small country, they were able to fight corruption in their own country, and people voted for Maya Sandu, for her team today. And of course, Kremlin is trying to keep tensions inside the country. We know, everybody, that this term of election, before election, is very important one. So today is important as never before to have this concrete timeline for those countries, not to have again some backslides for them, and not to let Kremlin to take these countries back and to have these gray zones, or even worse, to have this empire of Russia even more enlarged. And that will cost even more than the costs we will have if we will be successful for next years with those countries.
Ja myślę, że na tym skończymy naszą
I believe this is a good point to finish this conversation. I would like to encourage you, ladies and gentlemen, to ask questions, to join this discussion. Ambassador, you referenced Robert Schuman. By the way, I don't want to start another discussion. In his Schuman's declaration, he talked about a community that might ultimately lead to a form of federation. So, when we discuss how to improve how the EU operates, maybe it would be good to return to what Schuman wrote. I will break the convention and I'll ask Jan Olbrycht, who is with us. Jan Olbrycht has been negotiating this multi-annual framework, this 7-year budget. He's been doing that as an MP. So maybe we would lose out because of the expansion or enlargement. By the way, I'm just saying that to complain because I'm in favor. Maybe the Polish farmers will say, come on, but direct subsidies will decrease. Let's look at farming in Ukraine. A lot of money is going to go there. What about the cohesion policy? Our regions will not be the poorest. One might say, well, all the better, but it's going to happen because the new ones will be even poorer. So you want me, sir, to say the least popular things in this room. I will take this opportunity to say a few things, ultimately to arrive at an answer to your question. Is it okay if I am seated? Sure. Notice the language. Those on the inside say enlargement, those on the outside say European integration. Those that are outside think that it's a natural process. This is what we used to say in 2003. We had always been Europeans and integration is important. And those on the inside said, you know, it's about enlargement. So those on the within say it's an enlargement. Am I going to benefit or lose out? Does it benefit me or not? Am I going to enlarge or not? On those on the outside, I've always been European. It's my right. I, Ukrainian, me, Polish person. This is the case. Ukrainians say, we have always been Ukrainians. And those on the inside say, we'll see about that. We will see, we'll discuss it within our own club. And another thing, something that the ambassador mentioned, there was this talk I sat at the dinner with this retired French bishop, and the French bishop said, you know what, in our circles, I understand high-ranking French church representatives, we were thinking whether Wojtyła was right. You really wanted you to join the EU. He really actually pushed. And we are just thinking, maybe you're wrong, maybe he was wrong, maybe we should have waited 2 more decades, maybe the democracy should have been more mature. I disagree with what the bishop said at the time. But it's not only the politicians who actually think this way. The intellectual circles also think this way. What happened in Central and Eastern Europe, as Mr. Ambassador mentioned, is not something to be proud of. So the question whether we want to enlarge ourselves, the club, is not only the question about the money. Maybe it could cause the club split from within. Maybe some people will try to destroy the EU from within. Look at what is happening to Schengen. Who opposes Bulgaria, Romania, and Croatia entering Schengen? Because basically some people try to block the entry of the 3 countries. They want the expansion to be stopped, and it's the Dutch that are trying to block that. And basically when it comes to expansion, enlargement, look at Turkey. They've been waiting in a queue for years now. Do we want them to join or not? Anti-Turkish sentiment in the EU is quite strong. Northern Macedonia, another question. France blocked their path because they disagreed to the Western Balkans joining, and Ukraine. And let me now move on to an answer to your question. When we discuss the budget, from the budget perspective, I would say nobody's going to give any more money. Whether it is 27 or 36 countries, the discussion is going to be, say, Rasa mentioned that, 1%, and that's it, we're not going to give any more. If we stick with 1, maybe it's going to be less. Secondly, the whole EU is in debt. If it is in debt, in the next 30 years, they will have to pay back this major loan. You'll have to get this money from somewhere. Now, the EU member states, their entry will not increase the pool of money. It will decrease what we can do within the countries. And Poland has the last opportunity to get more money. And Poland doesn't want to do that. So at this point, we're not going to take this money. In a moment, this money will be gone. After all, everybody will know that the situation has changed. It's going to be a different EU. It's going to change in character. So, my response is, when we are talking about Ukraine and Moldova, and this conversation doesn't include the money at all, which is interesting, nobody's discussing the money. They might be thinking that, but nobody's saying that out loud. Let's look at the German politicians. Horst Langes is just next to me. Among my German colleagues, the decision-making process is more important. Possibly the money is in the West and the decisions in the East. Nobody's going to agree to that. So the treaties would have to be changed. And this is something that is discussed more widely. It's interesting. Ambassador Tombiński said it at the very beginning, I believe. So enlargement from within can be looked at from different perspectives. It either as a security issue or as a financial issue, because it pays off. With UK, it paid off. In other cases, it was a security issue. Here, Ukraine and Moldova, it has nothing to do with the money, quite the opposite. It's about whether it pays off in security terms, whether it's good for the EU and NATO in security terms. So when we talk about the budget, we look at where we're going to take the money to pay off the loan. I don't want to take too long here, but what is really interesting for those who focus on the budget, money for Ukraine is not money for reconstruction. When we discuss the budget, we're talking about the money to keep Ukrainian economy afloat so that the system doesn't collapse, the social, the economic system doesn't collapse. Some people say that we need money for reconstruction, for rebuilding. Well, we'll see. Many will be willing to participate in that. But now we need to keep this economy afloat. This is what we are discussing in the EU. Our calculations say that in the budget, we will have to find 2 to 2.5 billion euros a month to make Ukraine survive the time of war. And then we will see. Again, to respond to your question, the enlargement, the internal perspective, we can discuss enlargement, but this discussion, ironically, is the least about the money. So let me follow up on that. Madame von der Leyen, at a cross-conference, mentioned even more. She said 3 billion euros a month. This is how much money Ukraine will be getting from the EU. I don't think she said where the money is going to come from. She also added that until now, we have granted 19 billion euro. The question is, where did it come from? Mostly, this money came from fees, because countries pay fees. There is no money like that in the budget itself. In the budget, we are looking for various tabs. 19. Ursula von der Leyen discussed the whole network of countries. The EU itself gave a handful of billion. The whole network gave 19 altogether. Today in the EU, we know that we cannot, as the EU, make the Ukrainian economy survive, but we are discussing it with others. Altogether, we will have to chip in, so 2 billion, 2.5 billion a month is going to be necessary to make Ukraine survive the war. And this is subject number 1 today. And the enlargement, yes. Some people, Russian people, ask about how much it's going to cost, but nobody is asking that question. Yes to Ukraine, yes to Moldova, and we'll see what comes next. We'll see what the situation is like. Because the French might be afraid of Ukrainian farming, but it's been destroyed. We don't know what's going to happen after the war. So,
I would like to add what just was mentioned. Of course, we will not avoid calculations on the costs for enlargement or memberships. It's both definitions are important, but having in mind, let's take into the consideration security aspect of enlargement, which is now utmost important because of security aspect, we see that enlargement went through this stagnation, and now we speak about further memberships of Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. I would add Georgia as well, despite the problems inside the country of today, but also let's have them together. But look, on security aspect, we were speaking a lot, talking a lot about European armed forces. Enlargement and Ukraine's membership in EU will help us to solve this problem, because today we see already the strongest European army in European continent, at least in the part of democratic part of European continent, is Ukrainian armed forces. And they will come with huge added value into our security, environment. And it will cost less for many countries to defend ourselves, being together with Ukrainian armed forces as the strongest armed forces. I am sure they now are, and they will remain as the strongest pillar to defend European continent for a long time, until Russia will become different, maybe in the future. But now it's not for the next years to speak about. And maybe Ukrainians will come to train our armed forces in the nearest future, how to do the job to defend ourselves. So this is just moment to think about the benefits of enlargement, the costs and calculations on money we will spend to have this country together with us, especially Ukraine.
No, ja oczywiście, brawa, tak. Ja oczywiście ze wrodzonym sceptycyzmem tylko powiem, że
being a natural born skeptic, I will say that this security thing has been going on for years. Elmar Brok today said the following: we have a lot of expenditure as European countries, and if we put all that together, we would have a huge army if we joined forces. The thing is, you know, basically we use different rifles, different ammunition. So even if we put together all of our forces, those forces wouldn't be able to fight together. At this point, we admire what the Ukrainian army is doing. And yet, as far as I know, Poland bought Korean equipment. It was after the war broke out. So the question is, what's going on here? Płaski Foundation, Robert Stell. It all started today in the morning. Mr. Brok spoke, and it was highly surreal. Well, there was a lot of surrealism in this speech. To respond to your question, so how does Poland define its security needs, also when it comes to heavy equipment? We look at it through the prism of our current needs. And yes, Leopard's purchases were considered. The question is, when are they going to be available? Because if they come in 8 or 10 years' time, then thank you very much, it's too late. We need to talk about, you know, things on the ground. Because it's like, you know, basically we need to deal with reality as it is. And European help, European assistance, the truth is the US, Canadian help to Ukraine is mostly about grants. Numbers are given when it comes to what the EU provides are mostly loans. So let's not actually be too proud of ourselves. There is no equivalent to a Marshall's Plan there. And the enlargement issue is somewhat similar. There are two dimensions to it. Vocation européenne is what the French call it, is the first dimension. So the first question is, the Ukrainians, Serbians or Moldovans have a certain right, but then you ask about the things on the ground. And with all due respect for you, Bishop, it's not that Serbia can simply expect things of Serbia and that everything will be given. Serbia basically got this government by themselves. They have a certain position on Kosovo, for example, and what is happening elsewhere in Bosnia. It is not aliens, it's not Martians that are undermining the Dayton Agreement. It's been taking years. And think about what you can read in Serbian papers. And another thing, the EU needs to be discussed, and I like what Ms. van der Leyen did. Look at what in the Balkans they see a bit of a treason. There was this freeze. And yet, we need those countries to have a more decisive stance. So there are declarations on the one hand and political reality on the other. This gap is too big, to be frank. And the last thing, politically speaking, it's impossible for a number of good reasons. It's impossible to quit the principle of unanimity. Now, why is it politically impossible? Because there is no trust to the main players, because they claim that they have the right to speak on behalf of Europe. Chancellor Scholz has been speaking on the EU policy vis-à-vis China. Germans do not have the presidency, right? And there are more examples like that. So yes, we could actually do a bit of self-flagellation, right? Everyone should do that, but please remember, we need to see the facts on the ground. We need the biggest European players to be more responsible, right? We need that. Without that, all these political and economical and financial problems are going to disappear. So this European army, this concept, we need to park that. So my appeal to you is that stick to reality, because the gap between reality and what is discussed is too big.
Yes, please. Who's next? Ad hoc, if I may. There is always a question what it means to expect everything from someone. So the European community attitude to Serbia, I said in the year 2000 when Milosevic was taken to The Hague. I'm not sure whether the EU did enough for the opposition that assumed power at that time. There were a number of very pro-European ministers in power at that time. I'm not sure the EU did enough to support them. So I'm not saying that we expect everything from the EU, but the EU community also needs to give something to Serbia, and not just to expect Serbia to do all the things needed on their own. Again, sending Milosevic to The Hague, then also Mladic. They are still considered heroes in Serbia. It's not the problem whether Serbia is part of the EU or not, but this is a problem of one nation, and you cannot really change the nation easily just giving it more funds. From the cultural point of view, such approach is needed. Also, religion and culture, perhaps. You have to consider what we can do to create one community. I'm not saying just a uniform Europe. We don't always have to be exactly the same. We don't have to be like the French or the Belgians or the Germans. We've got our cultures in different countries, but irrespective of this culture, there is a need for us to feel part of community, unified in diversity, where we feel at home in this community. And this is, I think, something very important. This is a big task for all of us. So I just don't want to point my finger at anyone saying that I will do something or you will do something. We want to move forward, as I said before, dialogue, discussion, an attempt, how to put it, try to maybe not convince, but try to also accept others the way they are at the moment and move forward together.
I would like also to react on Robert's interesting evaluations. But I would like to ask you, yes, you are right when we stick with the reality which is today. But we are speaking about the possible reality which will come with enlargement, with new countries, with new decision-making makers, I would say important very much, about countries. Country will come to European Union with the strongest armed forces in European continent, and this is the reality. So that's why we need some kind of reforms inside EU, because it's a parallel process. I cannot imagine the enlargement without EU. If you are in favor of enlargement, I think you have to be in favor of some reforms inside EU. Otherwise, this process will be very complicated, long, and we will use momentum. But if you allow yesterday about the reality of today and reality what we are speaking about for the future. Yesterday, the panel which you finished was, you ended with the anecdote, with the joke. So now I will use opportunity as well to short anecdote about the hell as well, but not with Stalin in the hell, but Putin in hell. I think very many know this anecdote, but it fits so much into the now discussion we are speaking about. So, Putin died and went to hell. After staying there for a few years, he asked to be allowed to leave at least for a while to see what's new in Moscow. They let him leave, and he goes to a bar, buys a beer, and asks the waiter, "Who's Crimea?" "Ours." "Who's Ukraine?" "Ours." Putin is happy. He asks how much for the drinks. Waiter, 5 hryvnias. I would like to reshape and to fit it into our debate. Why not 5 euros?
No właśnie. Wiemy, że jeden z wielkich polityków amerykańskich też przeszedł do historii dlatego.
We know one of the greatest European, American politicians said, "I have a dream," and he became part of history, having a dream. So a dream is something you need to have. One more question, if I may, Jan Timowski, and short anecdote, but certainly it will not be as good as the one we've just heard. Thank you very much for this excellent anecdote. So referring to also the comments yesterday, Madame Mihai also yesterday said that if you ask the question, where does the crisis come from? Some say it's because of the sanctions, because we've lost already then, because this is the Russian narrative. Klaus Welle, Secretary General of the European Parliament before 2014, at that time we had a publication. It was, the narrative was not about the cost of the EU and the enlargement, but he focused on the cost of the lack of integration. I think it was an excellent approach. I think this is the question you have to pose. What is going to be the cost, as you said, Madam Member of Parliament, or you, Mr. Ambassador? Maybe if we acted earlier, we would saved. The costs would not be so big. So maybe we should ask the cost, not about the cost of enlargement, not about the price we have to pay, but about the savings we make if we act quickly. Madam, or Mr. Ambassador, Russia, I think, is not really a country that has such an impact on the neighbors as the EU has. Russia is not the country, I think, very clearly, that builds a community that other countries want to join. Russia, as an empire, just fights and with war gains new lands, like within Russia, as you know, some of the regions are already now protesting against the current policy. So there is, I think, little willingness to join Russia, rather the opposite. Bloodlands, as you know, Timothy Snyder and his description of Bloodlands, this was the place where there was a lack of institutions. For this reason, this project of the EU institution that actually attracts others is based very much on the efficiency of the institutions, functioning institutions within the EU. Maybe we should also go back to maybe the ideas of the mathematicians from Krakow, the so-called square root vote that might help us perhaps in the decision-making, also in the context of Ukraine joining the EU. Concluding now, I think, going back also to the title of the conference, the role of Christians, I think we have to correct lies. I think we have to be against propaganda, the type of propaganda we sometimes see on Twitter, where the local leader or a Russian military commander would say to his soldiers, "You are going to fight Satan if you fight Ukraine." I remember at some demonstrations, the EU is 666. Some were protesting against the EU in this way. I saw such banners at some anti-EU demonstrations. And again, finally, in the spirit of the anecdote, Bishop Zoria, when we spoke in the evening, he said the name Russia actually has been stolen. Muscovia, you know, the Great Duchy of Moscow was the original name, and we should actually help it get rid of imperialism. And I, as a Christian, my vision, some project are such that you have to be a visionary. Maybe Serbia one day, as a member of the EU, in the spirit of brotherhood, Orthodox brotherhood, will teach actually Moscow and Russia how to actually come to terms with the loss of imperial big Russian or big Serbian empire without losing identity. I think Serbia can help here, Russia. It's a big lie, of course, that the EU is a threat to identity. Let us be optimistic. Thank you. Let me react perhaps to your comments, Janek. I did not say that Russia is attractive. I rather said that Russia has lost its attractiveness for other neighboring countries, nations to join in. But also, I wouldn't like to go too shallow. When we speak about the EU, we speak about further integration. We should, some say, we should also in the context of the enlargement, speak not only taking into account what our opponents, what the Russians are doing. We should find our own arguments, not to use the arguments of Russia, not because we are acting under pressure of the events. Of course, politics is very much about reacting to events. So, of course, we do react to events, but we have to be convinced that the decisions that we take result from our own conviction. We want to do it, and we do it in our own interest, not just reacting to the outside world. I also remember discussions about our Polish joining the EU. It was successful, a big success for everyone, not only for us. Well, today, some may, as Mr. Albrecht said, some might say that, well, what Cardinal Wojtyła was promoting, the Pope, John Paul II, at that time, well, some were saying it was not perhaps the best way to move forward, but it's a limited opinion, just some people we speak to. But I think we are going to be exactly in the same situation. Some Europeans have grown very comfortable. They believe that they are part of a larger structure, There are a number of elements. All the different elements is what we're familiar with. We know how to act there. And if something new comes in, if there are new countries joining in, it requires some change also, internal change. And you're not so comfortable anymore, perhaps. But, well, I'm convinced, and I am deeply, I've always been deeply convinced that Ukraine and other countries, Western Balkan countries, they should have the right possibility to become part of the EU. But of course, you have to find this critical mass on both sides that will lead to that. But I think we have to carry on acting here. And as you have just said, the losses or the costs, so-called costs of non-Europe, well, they can be much higher. If we were, imagine, some believe that we have as if forgotten the ability to speak about the success of the EU. Saving of Greece, as you know, we've almost forgotten, but we succeeded with Greece. Greece, just before the war in Ukraine, had actually a budgetary surplus, even taking into account the returns, paying back their debt. But this was a big success. It's quite different when compared to the situation over the previous 2 decades. So a big success of rescue for Greece. And we are forgetting about it. Now the pandemic, what happened with the vaccinations and the community approach there. We would have been waiting for much longer, I think, in some of the countries, because, you know, the richer countries could have purchased the vaccines faster, just like Israel bought it faster, paying actually twice higher price than the EU. But there was this joint purchase, and we all, in all member states, we were able to make use of that. So I'm afraid we have lost our ability to speak about the successes of the European Union. That's very important. Okay. Yes, please.
It will be the last points.
Almost.
Almost. No, not. I mean my. No. At least my. You will be the last. Your will be the last, but at least my intervention will be the last during this conference. So first of all, thank you very much for those extraordinary and very important points mentioned about the costs not to enlarge or the mistakes were done, and now we are paying, I think, costs because of the mistakes, be it on our soil or be it on Ukraine soil as well, because they also, I think, were not effective enough to use opportunity in the past to achieve what other countries achieved. But that is history. Lessons learned is very important, not to repeat them in the nearest future. And now, of course, what we need to fulfill our, dreams for the future, to have European continent secure and safe. Yes, because we are in the conference, we speak about Christian values. So I would like to finish my interventions saying that we live in a time when demanding more weapons for Ukraine is a Christian value. Somebody will say that it's a paradox, but it is what I am as Christian, as Catholic, I feel myself and what I am trying to do. And actually is even more. It is the duty of every Christian. Contributing to overcoming evil is also the duty of every Christian. So that's why Slava Ukraini, and thank you, what are you doing?
I wanted to thank you very much for the opportunity to be here in Krakow most interesting conference, and I'm going to share also back when I'm back in Serbia many of those thoughts, ideas. I think it's good that we speak about the European community, but let us also remember that the demographic changes in the world are going to lead us to a situation that in about 50 years, Europe will be even smaller, and there will be not enough people in Europe, again, demographic processes. So I think that we need to move forward. We need to let those who want to join the European Union, let them do it. Can I, again, finish with an anecdote? It looks like we've got an anecdote competition here. But, well, it also refers to the previous panel. A migrant died and then meets St. Peter. St. Peter says, you have to decide heaven here and hell over there. And he asks, where is Germany?
A ja dziękując za panelistom Państwu.
Thanking panelists, I just thought that perhaps concluding, maybe this is going to be our contribution also, symbolic also language formulation. We've heard Mr. Albrecht said that we are now having this perspective from inside the EU. There are other countries from outside. We speak about integration, and I thought about the time when I participated in the Laeken European Council. There was an important discussion there about the enlargement, a new enlargement. It was about the 10 new member states, including Poland, and I remember I saw Danuta Hübner, who was responsible on behalf of the Polish government for the enlargement, and she said, very important language change occurred. I asked, what do you mean? They started talking about us, candidate countries. They started saying future members, future member states. So maybe this is a good idea. The countries we've been discussing, maybe starting today, we should call them not candidate countries, but we should call them simply future member states of the EU. Thank you very much.
I teraz może jeszcze pan Rafał. Mamy zostać jeszcze, żeby...
Rafał? So we are supposed to stay, not to actually...
Mamy jednak, widzę, że większość idzie...
Or, well, most have left, so I will follow suit. It's going to be short. Ladies and gentlemen, October the 22nd, Saturday afternoon. Time to finish. So, times we had summaries. Now, things have changed. In a few days' time, you will find the summary of this conference on YouTube and on Facebook. All that has happened here will be available on YouTube and on Facebook. If you take this file and if you scan a QR code, the same that was removed from the plug yesterday, so basically you'll find whatever has been said here. So you can return to it, you can pass it on to people that are interested in what we've discussed here. Ladies and gentlemen, Tadeusz Pieronek Foundation has been the organizer of this conference, but we have organized it together with our partners, with the EPP, the Polish delegation therein, with Maciej, with the Schumann Foundation, and with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung that has returned to our project. Mr. Brock, Mr. Langers, thank you, gentlemen, because you have convinced the Adenauer Stiftung to return to this project. We are here largely because of the independence that we have been building. For us, however, to be fully independent, we need to be independent financially. If you would like to help us, or if you have an idea how to help us, you will find information on our website. We will meet in a moment for lunch. Before that happens, I would like to thank the interpreters. They have been working very hard with us for the last 2 days. The interpreters would like to thank the participants and organizers
oraz technikom.
and the technicians.
Ja mam nadzieję, że w przyszłym roku o tej
I hope
porze
that
spotkamy się
next
w
year
Krakowie, a może w Kijowie.
we will meet either here in Kraków or in Kiev, because the Kiev Metropolitan invited us there last night. It would be a dream of mine to travel to and fro from Kraków to Kiev and back. Thank you very much for everything. See you. Goodbye.
Dobra, no to się cieszę.